Dinner out is a go. Hello, my name is Will, and you're listening to Exploding Helicopter, the podcast that likes to see its helicopters suffer an elaborate method of death. Now, there was a time when it seemed Robert Redford would stay forever young. While his contemporaries slowly wrinkled and went bald, Redford remained supernaturally preserved. His boyish face, framed by that lustrous golden fop of hair, seemed to elude the ravages of time. But eventually Father Time did catch up with him. The craggy lines came, his posture hunched, and gradually that perfect bouncing blonde coiffure seemed to look like a mockery of the ravaged features below. So after his appearance in Indecent Proposal, Bob promptly took his crow's feet behind the camera to continue his film career as a director. All of which, by roundabout route, brings us to the film we're reviewing on this show, 2001's Spy Game, the film which saw Redford return to acting. Recently, the Sundance Kid has just announced his second retirement from acting, and given that he's in his 80s now, he probably means it this time. And talking of people whose best days are behind them, and who should be permanently pensioned off, it's my good friend Dara. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. I'm still hanging in there. I haven't quite got to the 80 years of age of Robert Redford, but this podcast has taken it out of me, I'll be honest.
You're feeling mentally that age, if not...
Mentally incapable of carrying on.
Now, Robert Redford has just retired from acting, and his character in this film is about to retire. So it made me wonder, Dara, how would you like to spend your retirement?
This wasn't in rehearsal, Will. What's going on? I'd like to, I think it's a bit of a cliche, but somewhere nice and warm where I can, my dodgy knee and dodgy elbow, the warm weather will help me slip slowly and quietly into the great beyond in comfort. I think that's what we all wish for, really.
And what would you be doing in these sunny, warm climes? Podcasting with me, I hope.
It could be septuagenarian podcasts from the Caribbean. That could be our thing, our little niche when the exploding helicopter, fashion wears out, if it ever will. I know this is going to carry on for many, many years.
Wow, just think how many exploding helicopters we'll have seen by that point.
It'd be like the Expendables, but for helicopter podcasts. So it's a terrifying thought.
Well, let's get back to the subject of movies and films. And, I wondered, given Robert Redford is toddling off to acting retirement, I wondered if there were any other actors out there who you'd like to see retire, Dara.
You know what? I think we've discussed this in previous podcasts, but I'm not a big one. I'm not a follower of actors. So I won't watch a film if a specific actor is in it specifically, unless it's a good film. So I like Will Ferrell in a lot of things he does, but I won't watch a Will Ferrell film if it's poor, just for the sake of it, even though I like him. On the flip side of that, there's not many people that I just dislike, and every time I see them, I would just, shy away from watching their film. If it's a good film, I will watch any actor. That said, I think we've talked about, and the name escapes me, maybe because of my hatred for him, but who's the guy in who took over the Bourne Identity
Jeremy
franchise?
Renner.
Jeremy Renner. I had a kind of bizarre...
What is it with his name that you can never say it?
I just can't bring myself to say it. There's something about him which I dislike, and I can't put my finger on it. And we watched that film. We watched a film with him in it not so long ago, the sniper film, and he was actually quite good in it. And yeah, I still got this in my mind that I don't like him.
Well, your friends at the True Bromance podcast have got a thing about Jeremy Renner's thumbs, because they believe that they're disturbingly long and like double jointed, and he's got got kind of like webbing between them.
What? First of all, shout out to the True Bromance guys. I got a lot of time for them. I like to know what the source of their research is, their empirical research, because this is a very specific detail. Is he an alien?
I don't think he is an alien. Huh? But he's maybe been crossbred with something, not strictly human. But could you just remind me how to pronounce his name again, Dara?
Renner.
And what's the first name?
Rara. There are too many R's in there.
Mm.
Jeremy Renner. That's enough. Let's not talk about him anymore. It's upsetting me.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
Right, I think it's time that we put on our false nose and glasses and infiltrated the trailer for Spy Game.
I can train you as an agent. Central Intelligence. You'd be working for me, mostly undercover. Undercover?
Give me another.
Guy in the bench.
Loitering, up to no good, definite threat.
Guy in the gray sweater.
Gray sweater. Gray sweater?
Gray sweater. Don't forget what's right in front of you.
Ugh. Gray sweater, low IQ, terrible hygiene, lousy with the ladies. Definite threat.
You work for the CIA. What is your connection?
I have no connection.
I thought spies drank martinis.
Scotch, never less than 12 years old.
This better be the best damn breakfast I ever had.
Spy Game came out in 2001. Robert Redford plays a veteran CIA agent who's just about to toddle off into retirement, but on his last day at work he learns that his protege, played by Brad Pitt, has been captured by the Chinese government while carrying out an unauthorized mission. Fearing a diplomatic incident, the CIA's spineless bosses want to wash their hands of Pitt and let the dastardly Chinese execute him. Will Redford find a way to rescue his friend, and can he do it before the leaving speeches and carriage clock presentation? Spy Game stars Redford and Pitt in the leading roles. It's got an interesting supporting cast, so there are small roles for acting luminaries Charlotte Rampling and David Hemmings, and then a host of familiar character actors like Benedict Wong, Stephen Delane and Marianne Jean-Baptiste. It was directed by Tony Scott of Top Gun and True Romance fame. The film has a 7.1 rating on IMDb and a 75% audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Critics' reviews were positive, with the Village Voice saying that beneath the film's nostalgic veneer and tooth-rattling effects lies a mature ambiguity that's unusual for a Hollywood blockbuster. So, Dara, what did you make of Spy Game?
It makes me feel safe and confident that my take on films does tend to chime pretty directly with the kind of Rotten Tomatoes IMDb fan base, because I thought this was a pretty good film. It's one of the better films we've seen lately. It's not quite up there into sort of classic status, but it is a mature story. It's an interesting story. I think the casting of this is kind of one of its strong points. The kind of play off and payoff between Robert Redford and Brad Pitt's characters as a kind of mentor protege is very good. It's very engaging. I think Robert Redford got the slight better scripting in this film, because he's more enjoyable for me than Brad Pitt's character. He doesn't get to do a huge amount. I thought it's slightly long for a film. And obviously they're trying to tell a story of two people's interacting lives over kind of a 25-30 year period, building up how they one trains the other, and they meet again in different locations, and to sort of culminate in the kind of Robert Redford's last day at the CIA, having to try kind of his coup de grace is to try and help Brad Pitt survive imminent Chinese execution. I enjoyed the film. There's a lot of good things in this film. It's not perfect though.
Yeah, I'd agree with a lot of what you said there. I really enjoyed this film, but it's certainly not a perfect film, but my view is probably a bit coloured by the fact that I love spy films. Well, in fact, I basically love anything to do with espionage. So, spy novels, spy films, factual books about the history of espionage. I love it all. So this film is really in my wheelhouse. And as you're saying, it's a really slickly told thriller. And you've got in this film, for me, as a sort of fan of this type of genre, you've got a really good battle of wits taking place within this film. So essentially, Robert Redford is, I guess, the hero of this film, and he's outwitting the enemy, which is in this case the Chinese, but he's also outwitting his bosses as well. And he's using his guile, he's using his cunning, he's using his mental sharpness to kind of to achieve those particular aims. So it's a really enjoyable, as I say, battle of wits.
Yeah, that's the best bit about the film for me. So for anyone who's not seen this film, you've got a 24-hour window where Brad Pitt's character is going to be executed for espionage by the Chinese authorities for breaking into a prison to rescue his girlfriend. And in that time, the CIA get hold of Robert Redford because they know that he's got case files on Brad Pitt because he's trained him up. In order, what they want to do is get some information from Redford, which justify them not acting because they don't want to scupper a trade deal with the Chinese.
Well, they don't actually. You've actually sort of given away one of the kind of significant reveals, which is later in the film, which is the CIA don't actually know, like, what on earth is Brad Pitt doing in that. Why has he done this off the books operation going into this prison? They, at the beginning of the film, they don't actually know what that is. So a lot of this conference that is taking place is trying to work out, like, what on earth was he doing going into this prison? What's the story here? As you were saying, in the context of having this 24-hour window, as they try to decide what they're going to do here, and they are basically leaning towards, as you said, letting Pitt take the consequences for his own actions, because there's this sort of trade deal that the kind of American government wants to do, and they don't want people rocking the boat.
Yeah, which is quite apt. Obviously, Chinese superpower at the moment, so it's kind of, if you think about it, quite a timely plot. So in order for you to flesh out the story between Redford's character and Pitt's character, is told through a series of flashbacks. So Redford trained up Pitt when he was a naive Vietnam sniper, recruited him from the army, trained him in Germany, and then he's with him on various different missions around the world before the kind of final one in Beirut, where they have a parting of the waves, because Redford's character is very
cynical, isn't he?
Yeah, he's very cynical, and he does things by the book, whereas Pitt's character is supposed to be a little bit more humanistic, and in the end that's his undoing.
Well, let's dig into the structure a little bit more. So essentially you have this, the scenes which are taking place, contemporary scenes which are taking place where the CIA bosses are trying to work out what's going on with Pitt's character. Why did he do this mission? And so that particular part of the film, then, you go back into the flashbacks to tell that story. So essentially the film is broken down into sort of two elements, which is how Robert Redford is going to get Brad Pitt out of this particular jam. But then also there's a sort of a mystery element around why Brad Pitt's character is in this particular...
In prison, in this conundrum.
So there's a why he's done it, and there's also a plot line which is about how's he going to get him out of it. And I don't know which one of those two elements worked best for you, because for me, the bit that I was really engaged in was how Robert Redford is going to get Brad Pitt out of this situation.
For sure, absolutely. That works for me so much better. Because it's kind of like a pitting the wits, and it's some of that using that old school. He's the classic. Instead of it's 3 weeks to retirement, black police captain, it's Rob Redford's literally on his last day. He's about to get his pension and drive off in his sports car to no doubt somewhere hot and sunny to rest his knees. That bit works for me so much better. I don't know why. I think Brad Pitt's character in this it's a bit cold in this. You don't really get a full sense of his motivation. I don't know whether that's to do with
well, I don't think you get a good sense of the motivation of either character. I mean, what ultimately do you really know about Robert Redford's character in this particular movie? Next to nothing.
You don't.
And I think the same goes for Brad Pitt. He volunteers to be a soldier in Vietnam. We learn that, but we don't learn his motivation for volunteering for that. And he then joins the CIA, and we don't really understand what his motivation is for doing that. And so I think there's lots of really good elements in this film, but there are some weaknesses, and how well those two characters is a big one for me.
I completely agree, and that would have elevated this film into something a classic. And sometimes you lose a little bit of interest in it's just the song and dance between how they do it and the little clever things they do. Those bits are good, but the motivation for everyone to believe in a film, believe a story, you've got to kind of empathize with the person. So you've got to kind of understand where they're coming from. And I think you're absolutely right. They're kind of hollow boxes. These two. You don't really know where they're coming from and why they behave in a certain way. I know there was one thing that you were quite you didn't really understand why Redford's character was suddenly turned from a kind of by the book 30-year career CIA agent to suddenly on his last day doing one over on his colleagues and helping out his former protege, because it didn't really tally with the rest.
Well, it's a slightly different problem that I had, which is that within the context of the film, Redford's character is portrayed as somebody who is very focused on getting the mission done, focused on loyalty to his country, and the human assets that he, meets and encounters and has relationships within the film, they are serving that wider aim. And if they need to be sacrificed, then he will sacrifice them. And what the problem I had was that it then seems to go against Robert Redford's character at the end of this film, that he should step in and, as you say, kind of go against his bosses, go against the CIA to launch this sort of one-man mission to save Brad Pitt. It just doesn't seem to tally with what we've learned about his character earlier in the film.
I know what you mean, and obviously him spending basically his life savings on a bribe basically to the Chinese power station owner in order to get a blackout on the prison so the SEAL team can go and rescue the girlfriend under cover of darkness. It's supposedly explained in the film, and to be honest, I had to, on second review, only pick this up, that Robert Redford's character tips off the Chinese authorities because Brad Pitt's girlfriend was involved in the Chinese embassy bombing in London. So they had to show, and he was worried that Brad Pitt was getting too close to her. So he tipped off the authorities to get her snatched away. She ends up in prison. Robert Redford underestimated Pitt's relationship with the girlfriend and didn't expect him to break into a Chinese prison, expect him to probably just go out to another bar and get another girlfriend, which I would have thought so, because in the film
you can't judge everyone by your own standards, Dara.
Well, I got very high standards and I expect people to live to them. You don't really see that connection, and that's one of the big drawbacks in this film. I don't know many people I would break into prison for. If my girlfriend went to prison, I'd think twice probably about breaking it in. And I've been with her for 4 years. So someone you just met in a Beirut flop house, I'm not sure you're going to travel the world and break into a high security prison on the space of a couple shags. But that is what happens in this film, and that's kind of the bit that you have to suspend your disbelief.
Okay, so a couple of shags, no. 4 years, still no. What's the threshold you have to get over, Dara, with you that you would break into a Chinese prison?
You got to put a ring on this finger, baby. You got to put a ring on this finger. No,
okay.
I ain't no piece of meat.
Okay. Well, what you do get, I mean, we have poked quite a few holes in the film here, but what you do get is, I think, a really slickly told story here. And you obviously got Tony Scott here as the director, and he's directed a lot of very high concept movies. He's very well known as a sort of visual stylist. What did you make of his directing style in this movie, and do you think it fitted with the material?
Well, Tony Scott's resume is without compare, really, because he's done some great films. True Romance, Top Gun. These are all, in my book, classic films, rewatchable films that, deliver it again and again. For me, personally, this sort of film, I found in the beginning his style was a little bit too flashy for me. He loves a jump cut. He loves an editing technique, a fast forward. It's kind of very, very early 2000s. If you think of a lot of kind of cop films and cop TV series, they kind of maybe they copied him. I don't know who copied who. He's been, he is a master director. He's been doing it for a long time. So maybe people did start to copy him. I don't really like it. It takes me out of the story. If it's something that's kind of very realistic, you're trying to tell a story about, a long relationship, I would have preferred a little bit more of a natural directing style. And to be fair to him, as the film goes on, it kind of settles down. It's almost at the beginning he wants to lay his cards on the table. This is all exciting, and look at all these, things fast forwarding and rewinding, and little clips with where they are in the world. He kind of just he overdoes it a little bit at the beginning. Who am I to say how a director should do things? Because I felt that the directing, when he's actually on location, a lot of the filming was done in a. You don't feel like you feel like you're a bystander watching certain scenes, a lot of sort of extras, and it was done in a really kind of naturalistic way, which I really enjoyed, really preferred that. It gets you into the kind of rhythm of the film and the sort of a vibe of these people on location doing dangerous things in dangerous places. For me, it kind of hit, I don't know why, but he kind of settled it down, and I actually quite enjoyed it towards the end.
Well, I think Tony Scott was concerned about the amount of middle-aged white people in a room talking to each other, and so I think that a lot of his visual tics and tricks are down to wanting to kind of jazz up what you're watching, because he's sort of worried about the attention span of the audience. And I wonder if actually this film would have benefited from a much different style of directing. A really good spy film in recent years was Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and that film had a very slow, methodical pace, but it was completely gripping. There was no fancy editing tricks there, and it was essentially, that movie was just all about people talking to each other, but it was incredibly gripping. And I kind of wonder if this film would have benefited from that type of style of telling.
I think that's another beauty is in the eye of the beholder, because I found Tinker Tailor a little bit slow, if I'm honest.
Okay.
I think if you're a huge spy aficionado as you are, you kind of revel in the eking out of the story and the eking out of the dialogue and the relationships. I found Tinker Tailor a little bit slow,
okay,
and a bit worthy, and maybe that is the reason. And you're very perceptive to pick that up. That might be the reason why he decided to sort of make the location middle bits a little bit more kinetic in order to kind of just keep the excitement ticking over. But for me, I was quite happy with the CIA boardroom bits and him mooching around his office trying to get bits of paper and spying little code names on bits of paper around the offices of the CIA buildings. I thought that was all quite nice and quite clever and quite old school, and I enjoyed that bit more.
Well, let's talk about that particular part of the movie. Let's talk about the spycraft that was on display in this movie. And yeah, you've given some really good examples of it, because this is, I guess, sort of spycraft at its simplest. So it's essentially about Robert Redford using his observation skills. It's about him bluffing people, his ability to kind of read what people are thinking or feeling and manipulating them to his particular ends. And I really enjoyed that type of low tech spycraft where it's just basically one person just using their wits, using their intelligence to bend a situation to their ends or needs.
Yeah, it's very clever actually. And yeah, it's kind of the antithesis of Bond, really. There's no fancy gadgets or ejector seats to get him out of trouble. It's all kind of clever. It's all charm, tradecraft. And obviously to do that, you need a very charismatic actor. So he fits the bill perfectly. He's basically, the skill is just really opening his eyes and looking at stuff. It's, there's nothing really revolutionary in what he does. He just looks at bits of paper that don't.
Makes you wonder why more people don't do it.
Yeah, just look at stuff. If you're an FBI agent, you open your eyes a little bit wider, and you might find ISIS conspiracies. And as again, it tallies in, I think, with our favourite bits of the film, with him just playing people off against each other, making phone calls, and trying to pretend that he doesn't know what's going on when he does. It's very,
or vice versa, pretending he knows more about what's going on when he doesn't. And
absolutely, and those bits were the most enjoyable bits of the film for me.
I mean, the kind of, I think you mentioned at one point that you really enjoyed the kind of the boardroom scenes at the CIA, and I think those are my sort of favourite scenes in the movie as well. And I've heard Tony Scott sort of talking a little bit about making this film and how he was staging those scenes, and he had in his mind when he was putting those scenes together the idea that essentially that every one of those scenes was like a hand of poker, and it was about the players trying to play their cards or play the information that they've got in the best possible way, trying to read what information or what cards the other people sitting around the table had. And I think whatever else the flaws are, he actually makes those scenes really work. And I think that's a great analogy as to how he tried to stage those scenes, because that's really how they come across.
Yeah, that's credit to him, because that's kind of how I feel about them as well, and they work really well. Because at one point he gets tipped off by one of his former CIA colleagues that his protege Brad Pitt is in prison, and he kind of releases that information to him before anyone else knows. So he goes in and pretends that he doesn't know about what's going on, and is looking around to try and work out what the angle is. And they can't tell him too much because it's still classified and he's on his last day. So it's kind of a cat and mouse game between the two. And I think we're going to talk about some of the actors in the film. I particularly liked Stephen Delane. You and me, Will, we've got a history here. We love a good movie arsehole. Those, in the 80s, we've blogged about this before, but you had plenty of these kind of really risible characters that you could really enjoy hating. And Stephen Delane, maybe a performance of a lifetime. I know he's in Game of Thrones, but I really liked him, his character in this. He's a real nasty piece of work, this kind of like corporate man trying to screw everybody over. Eventually he gets his comeuppance.
Well, I had him down as one of my favourite actors in this particular film, and I think you start to describe him very well, because he plays this CIA desk jockey, and he's this really Weasley character who is out to get Redford. And I really like the moment where he thinks he's got one up on Redford, and he sidles over to the buffet and starts helping himself to some food, and he sort of gives a little hip swivel of a dance. And it just totally, that little one moment, I think, said volumes about the type of character that he was trying to play in this film.
Yeah, so in all good films, you do need a kind of a good bad guy to kind of you've always got the hero, so you've got to have the antithesis of that. And Delane's really good. He's kind of very watchable in this, and he's kind of smarmy slyness that we don't get as much. I don't see that as much in films these days. So I really did enjoy his performance. Obviously, the whole film is the pairing of Redford and Pitt. But I thought I want to give a big shout out to, and I would like it if he actually listened to this podcast. But there is a very small, but it's a reasonable part. He gets a few more lines than I would expect. I don't know if you spotted UK Iranian comedian Omid Jalili in this film.
I did spot him.
I've seen him. So for anyone who doesn't know him, he is a UK-based Iranian comedian who always plays swarthy Middle Eastern character parts. I think he's in Gladiator, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm sure that he's in Gladiator.
Yeah, he's like a slave trader. He always plays kind of like untrustworthy, sort of Middle Eastern hairy people. He's in this.
Are you thinking that this is a career path that you've missed out on, Dara?
He's taken my jobs basically. This could be me. It could make it this could be my secondary career. And I've seen him live actually I've seen some of his comedy because he's a stand-up comedian, and he does joke about the fact that he does get typecast. His agent probably jokes, when he's on the phone to him about got you another thing, Omid, you're going to have to play a terrorist, but it's good money and it's opposite,
Whoever.
So, yeah, I liked him. He wasn't very comedic in this, and he's actually a very funny man.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be looking at the exploding helicopter action.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the Cinema Recall Podcast here at thatmomentin.com. I am your host, The Vern, and on each episode, myself, along with a guest, will be talking about an iconic scene from a classic movie. Which films will we be discussing? Well, that's all up to you, because before each episode airs, we're going to be giving you a poll of great flicks to choose from. Whichever one gets the most votes, that's the one we'll be talking about. So, listen to the Cinema Recall Podcast on the site thatmomentin.com, or on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, or Podomatic, or SoundCloud. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy it.
We're back, and now we're looking at the exploding helicopter action. This takes place during the infamous Vietnam flashback, where Redford orders Pitt to assassinate a top NVA official. While Pitt lies in wait for his target, he's spotted by a helicopter which opens fire on him. Pitt returns fire with a machine gun, damaging the chopper's engine. The wounded whirlybird spins slowly towards the ground before disappearing behind a small hill. We hear a crash and a huge fireball suddenly erupts into the sky. Charlie don't surf, and after this chopper fireball, he don't fly either. Dara, what did you make of this chopper fireball?
Oh, well, very disappointing. From someone with such pedigree like Tony Scott. The man made Top Gun, for God's sake. He should know how to,
explode an aircraft.
Explode an aircraft, an acrobatic spectacle in the air. And yet, what do we get? We get a chopper go down behind a hill line, a tree line. Don't get to see any of the cockpit. No writhing around. You know how much I love a burning pilot writhing around in agony.
You like people in agony. You like watching people in agony.
I love it. And yet, there's nothing here. There's nothing to go on apart from a well-rendered, and it's a original explosion, no CGI, so I can give him that. But you're missing a big trick here, Tony.
Well, it's the oldest cheat in the book, isn't it? It's one of the greatest exploding helicopter like directorial no-nos, which is having
Shortcuts.
having the vehicle disappear behind something else and then just sort of exploding some pyrotechnics to suggest that it has actually exploded. And
really poor.
It is. I mean, it's kind of Hall of Shame stuff, really, from a director. As much as we've praised Tony Scott for this film, I think we can't overlook how he has let exploding helicopter fans down with this particular movie.
Down very badly.
But I have to say, Dara, this is I know you like Tony Scott films. He's also exploded another helicopter in another movie. So there's a movie called Domino, which came out a few years after that, and there's an exploding helicopter in that. But the same thing happens. The helicopter disappears behind some buildings before exploding.
As Oscar Wilde once said, if you fail to explode a helicopter once, that could be folly, but to do it twice, that is something else. I'm paraphrasing, but I'm sure Oscar Wilde said something very similar. I think maybe we found maybe a glitch in the Tony Scott armory here, and he just doesn't know how to explode a helicopter. This is basic stuff for a man of his quality, I would have thought.
Well, I mean, you do have to start wondering, as you so eloquently, paraphrase the words of Oscar Wilde. Once looks like misfortune, and twice looks like carelessness, or in this case, possibly incompetence. Because 2 times he's failed to deliver the goods. You have to start wondering what's his particular problem. But we do need to give perhaps Tony Scott a little bit of credit back, because apparently there was one scene in this movie where Tony Scott wanted the sequence to be shot with a helicopter because he wanted to have it swooping round the location, and the producers wouldn't stump up the money for a helicopter to do those shots. So Tony Scott, to his credit, he thought, I want this shot so bad, he paid for a helicopter himself to film the particular sequence. So
out of his own pocket?
Out of his own pocket.
Wow, that's good stuff. He goes up in our estimation.
He goes up in our estimation, but if only he'd dipped back into his wallet and paid for a helicopter to actually blow up properly.
Some carcass or something. I mean, I saw a little clip on YouTube in the making of this film, and apparently there's quite a few helicopters actually in the film. What with the Vietnam flashback scene, and also the SEAL team entering the prison, they had to land on a tiny roof in darkness. But no amount of scenes with the helicopters will help us forget the fact that he really dropped the ball on this helicopter explosion.
And the other thing, this is very geeky and very techie, but I did a little bit of research, and the helicopter that we see in this particular scene is a MIL-2 helicopter. And
hello, Internet. It's a MIL-2 helicopter. I hope you should know about this.
Well, I think you should know about this, Dara, because its presence in the Vietnam War is very extraordinary, because according to the information that was available to me, it was essentially bought by Eastern Bloc countries, and certainly didn't seem to see service, or was bought by the Chinese or by Vietnam.
Oh, so this is some sort of helicopter continuity error, where they've chosen the wrong model of helicopter to do the job.
It is essentially a kind of helicopter continuity error.
Wow, that's a whole new
dynamic
internet niche you've discovered there, a sub niche of a niche that you've discovered there, where people don't use the right sort of helicopters. Unforgivable, frankly.
Its presence in the Vietnam War is historically inaccurate. So
and don't write in and say that comment's racist, because it's not. Okay, it's factually correct.
Okay, I think that just about wraps this up. Dara, thanks for joining me once again.
A pleasure as always, William.
If you enjoyed listening to the show, for goodness sakes, don't tell anyone. They're liable to judge you harshly for spending your time listening to this drivel. It's far better that we keep it as our little secret. So whatever you do, don't talk about this on social media, and under no circumstances should you review this on iTunes.
Don't do that. Don't retweet it or send us any money that we've been asking for every week. Don't do that, because that will undermine our Christian effort. This is almost like a zealous religious cult we've got going on here, Will.
And I've brainwashed you into continuing your participation with it.
And I do hope one day you will let me out of the cellar. One day. I hope to see daylight.
Well, that day hasn't come yet. But until then, keep watching the skies for those exploding helicopters.
This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.
And it just totally, that little one moment, I think, said volumes about the type of character that he was trying to play in this film.
Will, I'm going to stop it right there. I desperately need a wee. Can we pause? This is not to be aired on the internet. I'll be back in 2 seconds. Oh, hello, mate. Sorry about that. Back in the room.
I know you've got a problem with your knees, but have you got one with your prostate as well?
I've got very small. I do have to go to the doctor and get it checked once a week. Just check it's still there. That's what I tell him anyway.
Well, next time, just goddamn wet yourself, man.
Yeah.
So I just said about Stephen Delane. My favourite moment was the one where he does that little kind of